On Sirius 130, that's the EWTN channel. Hi, Alfredo.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you?
Great, thanks for calling.
My pleasure. Mr. Spencer, I have to tell you, you are so courageous.
Oh, you're very kind.
No, I'm not very kind, sir. You are just a man. May San Juan Capistrano pray for you.
Thank you.
But
Amen.
You're welcome, sir. But may I ask you, sir, are you not concerned for your personal safety?
Oh, no, not at all. No.
Not at all?
Well, okay. I do, whenever I'm speaking like in really hostile territory, like at a university, then I have a guard with me, or more than one, depending on how hot it is. But generally, no. Look, the thing is, if I stop doing this tomorrow, it's not as if I'm going to be immortal. Everybody's going to die, and there have to be some people who are willing to do the right thing, even if it costs, or we're going to lose everything that we have. I think people don't realize, especially among evangelical Christians, but also to some degree among Catholics, I find a tremendous quietism and passivity on this issue. And they all say, well, Jesus is going to win in the end. Well, this is great, but we have to remember that large sections of the world that were once flourishing centers of the church have been completely overwhelmed by Islam, and the Christians conquered, subjugated, converted to Islam, enslaved, tortured, imprisoned, everything else. And it could happen here. It could happen here, and we don't even realize. And so we have to have some people willing to take some risks to fight to prevent these things from happening.
Well said. Thank you for calling, Alfredo. Let's go to Riyadh in Germantown, Maryland, listening on Guadalupe Radio. Hi, Riyadh.
Yes, hi. How you doing, sir?
Very good.
Good. Mr. Spencer, with all due respect, I listened to part of the show, and I'm a little bit shocked and surprised that you would make the assumption that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, was invented or never existed. And basically what you're concluding is that the Islam religion is a made-up religion. A couple questions I have. What proof, like you said, there's no proof that Muhammad did exist. What proof is there to show that the Prophet Jesus, peace be on him, existed that does not exist to show that the Prophet Muhammad did exist?
Okay, well, I already answered that. As a matter of fact, earlier in the show, maybe you missed it, but I took the first 60 years of the development of both religions, and so I'll repeat it very briefly. For the first 60 years after the time that Jesus was performing his public ministry, you have the letters of St. Paul that are written by the apostle to the Gentiles. You have the Roman writers, non-Christian Roman writers and Jewish writers writing about Christ and Christianity. You have the writing of one or more of the Gospels. And you have the proliferation of churches all over Europe and the Middle East. Now, in contrast to that, in the first 60 years after Muhammad is supposed to have lived, you have the Arabs conquering huge expanses of territory, but you have no mosques, you have no Muslims, you have no mention of Muhammad or the Quran or Islam, either from the Arabs and in the public inscriptions that they put on buildings, or the coins they issued, or from the non-Arabs in the writings that they left about the conquests themselves. When they spoke about the Ishmaelites, the Saracens, the Hagarenes, various names for these people who came out of Arabia and conquered them, and they speak in great detail about the conquest. But you notice that all those names, Ishmaelites, Hagarenes, Saracens, and so on, they never call them Muslims, and they never call them Muslims or give any hint that they have a new religion or a new prophet or a new holy book. Now, that's an extraordinary thing when you consider that according to the canonical story, the Quran was completed at the time of the death of Muhammad in 632, and in 656, the Caliph Uthman collected together all the people who had memorized portions of it, standardized the text, had it written down, and had it distributed to all the Muslim provinces. And yet there's still no mention that the Quran even existed from anyone, people who were supposed to be Muslims or the non-Muslims, until the early part of the 700s, 50 years after Uthman. And even then, the people who mention it, the first mentions of it, one of them is from a Christian writer who says that there are these people who they have this holy book, and they have several holy books, as a matter of fact, he says, the Quran and Surah al-Baqarah. Now, as you know, Surah al-Baqarah is the second chapter of the Quran.
Correct.
But clearly, in the beginning of the 8th century, if a writer is referring to it as separate from the Quran, the easiest explanation for that, the most obvious explanation for that, is that the Quran had not been collected together even at that time, as it is now constituted. And so that completely contradicts the account of Uthman that it was already distributed and well known by the 650s. If it was, then why is it in the 700s we're only getting mentions of it then, and even then not in the form in which it exists today? And so there are many, many other anomalies in the early time of Islam. But this is the problem, because the conquerors, the Arabs, were supposed to be conquering these people because the Quran said to go and make war against the unbelievers, and because Muhammad said, I've been commanded to fight against people until they confess that there's no God but Allah and that I am his messenger. But nobody ever says any of that. You know, Sophronius of Jerusalem and the other writers in the conquered lands, when they speak about these people, they never say, well, they had this prophet who told them that they had to come out and conquer. They give no hint that there's a new religion involved at all. And I think that's a very glaring omission. Then you have very strange stories also of Abd al-Malik and Hajjaj ibn Yusuf in the 690s. And Abd al-Malik says, I collected the Quran together. Now, how is it that he did it if Uthman did it 40 years before that? But it makes much more sense that Abd al-Malik did it, and that he claimed that Uthman did it earlier in order to give his work an air of authenticity and authority by saying that it was something from antiquity. Whereas if the story of Uthman was true, then there's no reason for anybody to have invented the account that Abd al-Malik collected the Quran together. And so the whole thing points to the idea that it was all made up starting in the 690s and accelerating in the 700s and especially in the 800s.
Now, on the contrary, most hadiths was written during the Prophet's time and after his death, and those were written by his followers, same thing like the disciples wrote about Jesus Christ.
Well, there's just no evidence for that whatsoever. I mean, with all respect, if the hadiths were written during the Prophet's time, everybody was very mum about them and gave no hint that they existed until the 9th century, a couple hundred years later. Where were they all that time, and why were they hidden away?
That is not true. That is not true. It was in those times that there was the Islam religion flourishing. They mentioned the fact you're saying they did not mention the Prophet Muhammad in every topic is because the Muslims don't consider him anything but a prophet and a slave to God. They don't consider him God. They don't consider him this higher being like the Christians consider him.
I'm talking about they never mentioned him at all. I mean, what about the Shahada? It says there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. And there's not even any record of that until the late 7th century. And so if that even existed before that, it's funny that there would be no mention. And also, like I say, there just isn't any record of any of the hadith until Muwatta Malik. Muwatta Malik was written, published in the 770s, and that already is almost 150 years after Muhammad died. And there's no hadith before Muwatta Malik. I would ask you to produce it if it exists.
Well, there you go. Riyadh, I'm so sorry, but we're all out of time, and we've got to move on to just a few more callers. But please keep listening to Catholic Answers Live. I'm sure we'll have Mr. Spencer on again. So let's go now to Bob in Severna Park, Maryland. Hi, Bob.